Today's video is going to be a little bit controversial, and the reason why is because we're going to be talking about modifying and tuning the NC1 NSX and why I don't recommend it. And we're going to go into detail, and we're going to actually talk about some particulars, and we're going to tell you why it's not smart to mess with this car. Well, first off, if you haven't watched our videos explaining how the NC1 powertrain and EV system works, you should, because that's going to be the first step to showing you why it's not a smart idea to mess with this car. This isn't a regular car like your original NA1 NSX that just had a V6 engine. This has so much electronics, has 3 electric motors, has so many ECUs, it has so many variables that you just can't modify and tune this car and think it's going to react like a regular NA engine or a turbocharged engine. This is a hybrid car, and hybrid cars are a lot more intricate, a lot more complex, and it took a lot of time for the Honda engineers to actually get this car to function good for reliability, performance, and other factors. But there's companies that give you a tuner and that you could go ahead and put in preloaded pre-maps in your car. And let me tell you why that's a really bad idea. I used to own an AP2 Honda S2000, and you could buy a Honda Pro or whatever. You could hook it up and you could reflash your ECU depending on the modifications you had. And as a matter of fact, you could share your remote tunes from other people, meaning that it was essentially somebody could email you a file, you could upload it to your car, and if it was close to the modifications that you had, you could run that. But let me tell you why all of that is a bad idea. Because a lot of people don't take into consideration the altitude and elevation that a car is at. So here in Colorado, I sit at 6,000 feet. But if you go to Denver, that's why they call it the mile high city, is because they sit about a mile high. And that has a huge impact in the combustion process. As a matter of fact, the density of air is so crucial whenever you're tuning a car that wherever you're at in the country, it can make it or break it, especially with turbocharged cars or actually NA cars that have individual throttle bodies. A fun fact is that here in Colorado, we have to buy a special coffee maker because water does not boil at the same temperature at the same time as in sea level. It's all science, it's all math, it's all the stuff that Honda poured out their hearts, all the work that engineers did to make sure that this car was done correctly. So what happens when you get a remote tuner for your NSX and you're like, all right, this tuner says that it's good for extra 40 horsepower if I have a downpipe and I have an exhaust. What you're not recognizing is that they originally got a real tune, that they actually tuned a real car, and now they're offering a remote shotgun blanket tune for everyone else. And that's just a really bad idea, because that car that got originally tuned, it actually was tuned correctly. They went to a facility, and within that facility, they got into a dyno meter, and they got into, depending on all-wheel drive one or rear-wheel drive, whatever they had to do to tune, because I'm not a tuner. And what they did is they essentially did passes on the car. They looked at the air-fuel ratio. They looked at the timing. They looked at the temperatures. They looked at everything that has to do with that particular car. And the crazy thing is, not all cars are the same. Even if you have a 2017 NSX sitting next to a 2017 NSX and they're perfectly stock, they're not going to be the same. They're not going to run exactly perfectly. And those variables are going to have an impact when you're having a remote tune, because that car that got tuned on the dynometer and that got actually tuned, you can't mimic those exact variables that car had. And when you're uploading a tune for that particular car in your car, it's never going to be a perfect match. But what people are not understanding is that your engine is working harmoniously, or whatever you call it, is working in sync with your EV system. And a lot of these tunes can't take that into consideration because they don't really know how everything works. So yes, you might get a little bit of extra horsepower because they're enriching the fuel, and maybe they're advancing the time a little bit. But the thing about it though is, if it's not a perfect tune for your car, it's actually going to hurt your car, because a tune is like a map, and every single variable in that map has to be perfectly curated for your car. So what's the right way to tune your car? Well, take it to a very professional shop, have a very reputable tuner there, and have them tune your car on the spot. don't get a remote tune. Don't just reflash your ECU, because on a lot of cars that might work. On my S2000, that worked because, yeah, my car was rich, it wasn't, probably running optimal compared to me getting a perfect tune. But at the end of the day, it wasn't force inducted. It didn't have 3V motors in there, and they didn't have enough computers to send a whole rocket up to Mars and back. And so what happens is that these remote tunes, they just conflict with the intelligence of the NC1 NSX. It conflicts with the EV system. And essentially, unless you get the car properly tuned, you're doing a major disservice to your NC1. So remote tunes, bad. Reflashing your ECU with some random handheld tuner that says, oh yeah, this is a tune that you can just upload if you have an exhaust. A bad idea. If you want to tune a car like this, you better do it correctly. You better take it to a correct place, get a professional tune, because if you don't, you run the risk of messing this car up. You run the risk of messing any car up with the wrong tune. But especially with the car like this, that so much is going on. So I thought I'd make a video about this because I'm seeing people who are having issues with their modified NC1s, and you really can't skip corners with this car because it's a lot more complicated than people think. And that's why they're getting all the Christmas tree lights in their dash. It's just not a good idea. Well,